Hello and welcome to the inaugural podcast of Political Soup. My name is Johnny Flores. I am here to talk about everything political here in our great country. Now, first of all, I'd like to express why I decided to do this. First of all, I like to talk about things in an objective and realistic way. Too often on social media or watching television or anywhere else, you get more of a slanted take on today's news. You get a lot of hyperbole, a lot of exaggerated notions of what things mean. I hope to bring it back down to the surface and to examine perhaps the implications of legislation, comments, actions done by our politicians and ourselves and our fellow citizens, and try to see and make sense of what is going on in our country. Now, of course, I'm going to examine legislation, news of the day, maybe things that matter in America, things like, legislation for one, right? Bills that are passed in Congress, if there's any bills that are actually passed nowadays, that affect our lives and the lives of our kids, the topics of the day that have to do with social issues, race, gender, things like that, and also where we are as a society. We are arguably in one of the more polarized places we have ever been, which is not good, right? Perhaps the most polarized time in our country since the Civil War. Now, let's proceed into a discussion on the legislation that is before us, the legislation that has been debated for the past few months, sometimes with extreme harshness and frustration, and that is President Biden's signature legislation, the Build Back Better bill. Now, this bill is massive, as you know, started at $3.5 trillion after many discussions and much opposition from the moderates in both the House and the Senate. It is now whittled down to $1.75 trillion. Now, where are we? A couple days ago, it was breaking news on a Sunday morning Fox talk show. Joe Manchin, essentially with a dagger in hand, put the Build Back Better bill out of its misery. Now, why, may you ask, might Manchin have done this, since it is his own party who favored this legislation by wide numbers? All 49 of his other Senate colleagues favored this bill, but it was Manchin that stood in the way. Now, Manchin, as he said, no, I can't do this. I've tried everything humanly possible to vote for this bill or to come to a place where I can agree on its terms, and Manchin was not able to do that. Now, it can be argued that progressives knew Manchin's opposition since July. We knew that Senator Manchin had a problem with the child tax care credit. He wanted more of a means test, more of a way of knowing where this money was going. And you had a recent report that said, Senator Manchin said, well, these parents are just going to spend this money on drugs. Is the money getting to where it needs to be to the children? And Manchin, therefore, could not agree to preserve that child tax credit, which was only an extension of a year on this child tax credit. And Manchin essentially struck it down. Now, he had other qualms with this bill, whether it be some of the climate measures that were put in. I mean, the man does come from a coal state, West Virginia, right? He is coming from a state, let me remind you, that President Trump won by 39 points in the last presidential election. So let's not pretend that Senator Manchin is in the same position as a Nancy Pelosi or a Senator Chuck Schumer, which comes from a solid blue state and district. Because progressives can argue and insult. They can argue for replacing Manchin and getting some legislation passed that doesn't involve having to go through Joe Manchin. But there is one simple word that they are simply not registering. And that is the word math. There is a 50-50 split in the Senate among Democrats and Republicans. And it can be argued that the American people during the last election did not vote for a large progressive agenda. They voted, as you can see from Republican votes, who voted heavily for senatorial candidates that were Republicans, but then turned around and voted for President Biden in the presidential election, that they did not vote for a big government takeover in many areas. They voted for moderation. Remember, they wanted a return to normalcy with Biden. Now, whether we got that, that's another story. But this might be exactly what the American people wanted. And let's not forget that we are a republic of many different states with many different interests. This goes back to our history with sectionalism. Remember that argument of, well, you hear the North and the South, but not every state is the same. Every state is different. And the beauty of the United States is as these states come together and their representatives come to terms on a piece of legislation that will serve everybody. Moderation. So, progressives can argue that Senator Manchin has betrayed everybody. Oh my God, the sky is falling. But who do you think will take that seat if Manchin leaves tomorrow? It won't be a Democrat. It will be a Republican. Once again, Trump won this state by 39 points. This is where we stand. So we are where we are. When Senate comes back from recess from the holidays, they will take up this bill. Now, there is an agreement that Senator Manchin gave to President Biden at his home in Wilmington, Delaware. And it does list a support for universal pre-K, hundreds of billions of dollars in climate investment, and an expansion of Obamacare. All, I will argue, are very popular. You're telling me that you're going to tell parents on the left and right that universal pre-K is not a big deal when pre-K in this country is sky high? That's a big deal. So you can argue that, yes, there's not a lot of things in this bill that we got. We don't get that child tax care credit, which is not in there. We don't get the huge amount of climate investment that we want. That this bill is not enough. Take the win. This is not the 1960s where the Democrats have a large majority to get big programs passed. There is a 50-50 split in the Senate, which means you have to govern on what is possible. Politics is the art of the possible. You cannot get things you want using a majority that you do not have. Now let's talk about the contemporary Republican Party. What do they stand for? What are their policy proposals to fix many of the problems that
exist in American society? Well, let's just say that they are not necessarily interested in solving a lot of the problems such as income inequality or even inflation or even a tax code that favors the very wealthy among us. Republicans nowadays only care about one thing: culture wars. Now, many of these culture wars, of course, they get the base riled up. They are, as you can see through the recent gubernatorial election in Virginia, these culture wars get people out to vote. You have many parents arguing that, well, in today's age, it is in the classrooms that the battles have to be fought. That our children are in public schools, especially being quote unquote indoctrinated with liberal ideas and liberal values. Perhaps there may be a little truth to what they're saying as far as most teachers being liberal, perhaps, as many teachers maybe have liberal arts degrees, whether it be in history or political science. But that being said, much of what they're saying might be the truth, is it not? In that slavery is the original sin of this country. Slavery existed not only to preserve the economy of the South in the 19th century, which was agriculture, specifically cotton, an economy that was based on slavery and the work done by African Americans in this country through means of oppression. And yes, much of that was based on the dehumanization of African Americans. And the foundation for that was, yes, white supremacy. That is truth. There is no arguing that point. Whenever you hear somebody say, well, the Civil War was fought on states' rights, yes, a state's right to preserve an economy based on slavery. So that argument doesn't fly. And school kids need to know this and make up their own minds as to what to make of it. So those who do not seek for their kids to be indoctrinated, as they say, may be the same ones that want to ban certain books from libraries. Now, don't get me wrong. I certainly am for parental control. But let's remember that parental control comes with the election of school board members and the election of legislators at the state houses. And those legislators, therefore, oversee much of the education that is given to children. But this idea that a parent has the right to go to a school board meeting and shout down a school board member and threaten them and threaten their families, no, that's completely wrong. That cannot exist. That is the incivility that plagues this nation. Now, don't get me wrong. It is not a teacher's job to instill their own politics on students. And let me make myself abundantly clear. If a teacher is trying to do that, trying to say, these are my politics, I will give them to you, and you must think how I think, then they should not be teachers. They're doing a disservice to themselves. They're doing a disservice to the parents, and most importantly, to the children. So what does this Republican Party stand for? And granted, there's some credence to the argument that maybe conservatism is the right way to go. We should not proceed on a tax and spend policy to spend all this money and pay for it later, spending money we don't have. There's a good argument to be made for a need of conservatism in certain areas. Values are important in families. The preservation of the family unit, one could argue, is important. Studies show that the preservation of a family unit will lead to success for a child. A child is more likely to not go to jail, to go to college, to achieve success if the family unit is intact. That is fine. But how are you not going to incentivize child rearing or incentivize a woman bringing a child into this world when you first take away her right to make that decision? Then you don't necessarily favor tax credits for children, for parents. And you also don't, you want to make preschool as expensive as possible. So where's the incentives for young people to have kids? And young people, by the way, that are not having kids at the same rate as they used to. As a matter of fact, it's at the lowest level in this country's history. It is frankly very expensive. So where's the incentives? By the party that says they value the family. So the Republican Party must make up its mind on which way they're going to go on this. They cannot keep just being a party of grandstanders, a party of the Marjorie Taylor Greens that seeks to just get Twitter followers and film altercations with Democratic lawmakers in order to gain popularity, in order to stay in power. What do they actually stand for? What are they going to do to solve some of these issues? I yearn for a time when there was classical Republicans who actually had policy positions and ideas for how to better American society. We need a balance. We need a strong conservative movement in this country to balance out the strong progressive movement. We have always been a country about balance. When you don't have that, when you have one party that simply just doesn't even care about democracy anymore, but only the preservation of power, that is not good for this republic. When you simply want to change the rules so your people can simply stay in power, where the ends justifies the means, then we have a problem. Now, I hope that this does not last. I hope cooler heads prevail in the Republican Party. But where's the counteroffer to Build Back Better? What ideas do Republicans have? You can't just say freedom and liberty. Those are bumper stickers. What are the actual policy proposals? You could slash taxes, very well. But how will you solve some of these issues on healthcare, on climate, on the necessity of a workforce in the 21st century, when you have people not having children, when you have young people choosing not to have children? Where's that workforce going to come from later? You certainly don't want it to come from immigrants who you want to exclude from America's future by limiting immigration, both illegally and legally. So where is that to come from? The Republican Party simply must make up its mind as to what they stand for. And I will argue that they might have become, in the last few years, simply a cult of personality. And I hope I'm wrong, but the evidence tells me something else. But this is where we are, folks. I have been happy here on a Christmas Eve to talk to you and lay out where I think we are, simply trying to stir up a conversation and find the balance in all this. Now, Christmas Eve is tomorrow. Then it's the big day, Christmas Day. We're going into 2022. The Omicron variant is raging, and we hope that it does not spread. And that we can end this pandemic in the year 2022 once and for all. I hope we do. And I hope as a country we can find civility and balance, and we can basically force our lawmakers to come up with policy positions for the problems that face us. If we cannot agree on certain facts, there is no debate to be had.